The work session is reconvened at 5:15 p.m. We will now move on to the topics for this meeting, which are 24-25 budget update and then guiding principles. And I believe Ben Rarick is going to be leading us through this conversation.
Good evening, board members. It's a pleasure to be presenting to you on both a current year update as well as planning for the 2025 budget cycle. This presentation will be done mostly by myself and my colleague here at Acker, but there might be situations where we phone a friend around the table here to tap into some of our content experts as well. I believe Becky told me we have until 6:30. Is that what the posted? Okay, so the one comment I would make before we get going here is that there's quite a bit of data content at the beginning of this presentation, some of which you've seen. I continue to include this data in these presentations because as more and more people tune into our deliberations, I want to be fully transparent and share that with all the audiences. Most of the content that is specific to the board and grappling with guiding principles is towards the end of the presentation. So I will be moving more quickly through the first part in view of the part that we want to spend most of our time probably at the back end. So if I'm moving too quickly, you can stop me, but that's the design of it.
Okay, I'm just going to step out. So my daughter lives in Los Angeles, and she said, call me when I can. So I'm going to let you guys keep going.
Okay.
I'm not going to miss anything.
Okay. Okay, so this evening we're going to talk about primarily four things. First of all, provide a current financial status update. We've got another months of data here that we can share. We're going to also share some data on statewide and district trends. And then in parts 3 and 4, we're going to talk about a recovery plan and talk about options and next steps and seek some input from the board and discuss what could be some guiding principles to guide the work as we prepare for the reductions necessary in 25-26. First, we're talking about current financial status. So this is a slide you're familiar with, and it just reiterates that last year the district spent $4.5 million more than it took in revenue, which resulted in the fund balance dropping from over 11 million to 6.6 million. And then we immediately get into the current year. Now this slide here is only updated through November, but an hour ago I got the data for December. So the thick green line there represents our cash balance in the general fund. And the December number is $1.38 million. It's about where we would expect that line to continue on the trajectory, being that it was 2.6 in November. For context, it's the sort of brownish line that represents the 23-24 school year. So you'll see that last year at the same time, month end December, we were at $6.5 million. Currently, we're at 1.38 million for a difference of about 5 million. That gap of 4.5 to 5 million has been relatively consistent. We expect it to be consistent. As a result, we continue to expect that in the months that are circled in red, we could conceivably have cash liquidity issues, particularly in March. And for that reason, as you'll recall, we put an interfund loan before the board in December, and then we were going to ask for action on that at the January 23rd meeting. This is simply a recap of some of the facts of what an interfund loan is for some of the members of the audience. The board was briefed on this at the last meeting, but in essence, it doesn't improve the budget situation for the general fund. It merely provides a temporary loan of cash that must be paid back with interest. Okay. So now we're going to talk about any questions, by the way, about the interfund loan. I went quickly there because we talked about it at length last month, but are there any questions from the board about what an interfund loan is and why the need for one? Okay. In terms of what's happening statewide, first of all, as most of us here are aware, because we live in this region, which is close to the legislative deliberations and state agencies, the state has agencies cutting. We're about to enter, or we're actually now in the 2026 legislative session, 2025 legislative session. And it is a fiscal cycle where it does look as if agencies and entities supported by state revenue may be asked to cut. We're sort of anticipating that and hoping for the best. And the next two slides are actually not of my making. We've borrowed these from the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction and attributed them to the bottom right-hand corner. But we've talked about the notion of an ESSER cliff several times as a body. And this does a really good job of illustrating what that ESSER cliff has meant at a system-wide level. And so what you see in the orange line is you'll see starting in 2015 what the trajectory of enrollment in the entire state was, and then when it turns blue, what the trend line was suggesting about where that enrollment would continue to be, all right? Then you see the orange line dip below and flatten out. That is an aggregate representation of what enrollment has actually done post-pandemic. And you see the gap, right? You see the double arrow gap, the double arrows there illustrating essentially that is the gap between what all the forecasts were saying about what enrollment would do, both district by district, but as a state as a whole, and then what actually materialized. And in many respects, that's what ESSER filled in to support in different ways in different districts, because not all districts were impacted in the same way. Tumwater is an example of a district that was impacted perhaps, not as extremely as some districts, but also not as moderately as other districts. And that gap was filled in by claims of ESSER money over 3 years. Those claims are now depleted for all districts.
Can I ask a question about that?
You may.
So ESSER money was designed to support schools for their costs related to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So that included, protection, different staffing and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the connection with the enrollment?
So the purpose of ESSER money as it was written up in the federal law was more than just buying the medical, masks and the sanitizing and whatever. It was also designed, and I actually think this was a phrase in the federal law, to maintain continuity of operations. So what was happening in, March of 2020, I think, was that, school districts found themselves literally right in the middle of a school year. Boom, the pandemic hits, kids quit coming to school, and left to its own devices, school districts were going to experience radically less enrollment, get radically less funding as a result of that, and the governor and the federal leaders were like, we don't want to create this mass panic where districts start wholesale firing all their bus drivers and teachers and everything that they know that they're going to have to hire back after the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So they encourage districts to use the money, not necessarily to add, but to maintain continuity of the operations of the district. So most of the districts continued to have bus drivers and food service workers, even during the period when some of those services weren't even being provided, because the idea was, remember at the time they thought it was going to be like a 1-year pandemic or a 6-month pandemic. They'd be turned right around and hire them all back, and they were trying to avoid that sort of mass panic. And so as far as I can see, Tumwater did a lot of that, did a lot of basically how to maintain the staffing and the services that it had going into the pandemic.
Even with enrollment drops, because it wasn't necessarily related to that.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. I mean, among the districts that I've seen, Tumwater was not nearly as significantly impacted as some of the other districts I've seen, but there was some drop.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think we also spent money, after we're all back, we had definite struggles, to bring students back. We had we had to deal with behaviors. We had to deal with these things that we hadn't had to deal with before. because kids have been out for about a year.
Yes.
So I think in the later years of the ESSER money, we were using that money, especially around special ed, around behavioral techs to help, to help with that work, which might seem like an ad, but I think at the time it made sense to use the ESSER money because those were definite needs as a result of the pandemic.
I think there was also, we talk about that relationship with enrollment to this. There was an expectation at some point around, hey, this ends, we open the doors full on, and these kids will return to school.
Yeah.
And I think that last graph kind of showed like that didn't happen, it hasn't happened, and it continues not to happen. And so it is like, and that, again, this isn't a Tumwater specific, Washington specific, it's a nationwide issue. Again, and this is, so I think part of why we're sharing this is the district really hasn't adjusted like staffing with the enrollment that has, for us, it's more flattened. We didn't see we saw a drop and then it's kind of flattened out, and we just haven't seen that spike go back up to pre-pandemic levels and increase like was projected at some point. So I think it's added to the complexities of the situation we're facing now that we need to sort of right-size the district to the funding model that we currently have.
Yes.
So one thing I've been studying the federal budget situation, and there's a lot of talk now about going back to 2019 budget levels.
Mm-hmm.
So the question I have for us is, how do we compare? How does our budget currently compare with 2019?
Mm-hmm.
And because that might be, again, help us with a solution. If we're way above that level in spending, then it helps us to rationalize with our people that we work with, like the school teachers, et cetera, are very valuable people that we work with, why we maybe cannot maintain where we are because we're going to end up with this deficit perpetually, at least for a while.
Yes.
So that was my curiosity of 2019 versus now.
Yes.
I don't expect an answer, but that's
Yeah, I was
just
gonna
something to
say,
think of. I'm sorry.
There's a couple slides
Something just to
that
think
come
about.
later that actually do give a little bit of historical context to that.
Okay.
And so maybe we can pick that up at that time. This slide merely shows, and again, this is not our slide we've attributed here, but it was from OSPI's presentation, that this sort of illustrates the impact that inflation has had on school districts. Because, when you look at the state budget and you look how much has gone to education, and you look how much is spent in education, your immediate assumption is, well, the number keeps going up, so what's the problem? And this chart illustrates that when you're looking at inflation-adjusted dollars, school districts have less purchasing power today than they did in 2019. And that's a counterintuitive thought for folks because we've gone through some periods of funding increase. But remember, inflation was also very significant during that time. And I think we've shared with you, just in the anecdotal example of our insurance payments, we're up to $1.8 million as a bill of insurance when we used to pay well south of $1 million. So whether it be bus fuel or anything else, like things have really taken off in terms of costs, and illustrates that even though funding may have gone up in nominal dollars, it's really not keeping pace with the costs that school districts have. These are the amounts of the ESSER claims. So looks like over a 3-year period, the school district claimed about $8 million, and that money obviously no longer available to the district. To your point, Director Adams, here's some historical numbers about just gathered from the S275, both for certificated staff and classified staff, that show like what it would mean to go back to 2019. I've shown you these before, and there's lengthy discussion to be had about these two, but perhaps we could loop back to that. And then, like you see, you've also seen this slide. Tumwater is a classic example of the importance of looking at the disaggregated enrollment data as opposed to just the total data. Because what has happened is that even though total enrollment in Tumwater has been, it's been down, but more or less flat, a greater percentage of our students are availing themselves of the variety of educational opportunities available to them, like the New Market Skills Center, like Running Start, which impacts the district financially. So one of the things that we've undertaken here in the fall and continue to undertake is scrubbing through our expenses. And it is common at this time of year for people to speculate as to, well, if we just cut all of our non-salary costs, like start there first, right? One of the things I like to do is just pull the top 25 and sort of illustrate for people the reality of what that is. Our number one non-salary expense, and these are fiscal year 24 numbers, so when I say 1.8, that was for the current year, but last year, just our liability insurance with SIAW was 1.7 million. We negotiate that to the extent we can. The issue there is you have to tempt, like, do you want less insurance as a school district, right? I mean, there's a reason. You can increase your deductible, you can, but there's only so many things you can do with your insurance. The services that we get through our educational service district, the amount we pay to PSE for utilities district-wide, the amount we pay to South Puget Sound for our Running Start programs, and our purchasing card program, which is the BMO cards are, that's a lot of school supplies and materials, basically. Gives you a flavor for, like, these are the largest non-salary costs in the district. Now, the place where we've been really able to make some inroads so far this year, you go all the way down to our attorney bill. We're down 70% so far this year in our expenses. We've made a very concerted effort to limit as best we can. Now, if we need to call an attorney, we're calling an attorney, but no standing meetings, just the most austere approach possible to the use of outside representation. And so now I'd like to kind of phase into the part of the presentation where we talk about next year, the year after, frame some options, and maybe let the board and the superintendent dialogue a little bit about next steps. So there's a few things I'd like to do. First, address some timeline issues, talk a little bit about cost drivers and ultimately what is our goal here, and there are some decisions to make about the goal. There's some nuances in terms of timing and specifically about the board's policy, and also talk about what we're trying to do to address communication and buy-in. I think there are at least 7 things. This is probably not an exhaustive list, but there are at least 7 things of what I think would constitute a fiscal recovery plan leading into the 25-26 school year. And they include the following. The first is, given where we are on a cash basis, we will be recommending to the board an interfund loan on January 23rd. To be clear, pretty much regardless of what we do, how aggressively we proceed, we would anticipate that that loan would be necessary for the duration of this year and into next year, because it would take time for any, there's a ramp up so that even if you made reductions, it would take time for those reductions to take effect. And so just for transparency, it's not that you would just have the loan for this year. It is a question of how quickly can you ramp off the loan, okay? Second, we have undertaken reductions in non-salary expenditures already. I think the superintendent shared with you his memorandum of October 11th to schools and departments, where all schools and departments were required to reduce a minimum of 10% of their discretionary, non-contract stipulated MSOC accounts. So there are some of these things that are in the contracts, and we did not seek to create a bargaining issue there. Third thing is that, when we talk about this recovery, part of the issue is the amount of the desired fund balance. The second is the speed at which we achieve that. We will be recommending a multi-year approach to the board this evening, but we will be couching it in options that are both faster and slower, so that you understand the context of that. It is clear at this point that we will need to recommend reduction in staffing for the 25-26 school year. You can expect to see steps in place throughout the early winter for staff to be bringing those recommendations to you. We'll also be, and probably as a matter of timing, I would say after that is done, we're going to be rolling out a pretty ambitious revision of pretty much an entire overhaul of the budgeting and spending procedures and practices in this district, ranging from policies of travel, food purchase, what does and does not warrant and approve overtime, how we approve overtime, how we engage facility use, who pays for facility use, when we allow facility use, and who can do overtime for facility use. It ranges pretty much every program. It will impact, it's going to be a pretty significant change, and we intend to engage our partners and our departments in that before we roll it out. But that is in the works. We also have implemented with Ms. Acker's assistance and leadership, a pretty ambitious program of what we call QBAD, the Quarterly Business Analytics Dashboard, which is tracking everything that essentially we can track about how we spend by program, by expense type. And we have, at this point, we're at the beta stage of that practice, but we'll illustrate the reason for that here in a second. And then finally, we're going to take a look at the minimum fund balance policy and make sure everybody understands what it says and its impact to this process. So to initiate this sort of plan, I think there's essentially 3 steps. The first is in the first year, we're going to immediately ask for the loan authorization. We will continue to implement those mid-year non-salary reductions. We are at the point we are at the point now where, unless there is a legal reason compelling us to fill a vacancy, we're not. We had one vacancy in capital that we did fill because that was in the capital fund. But other than that, unless it's required by an IEP or there's some other extenuating circumstances, we have not been refilling vacancies, and we've been monitoring retirements and separations very closely. And then 25-26 would involve, at this point, a reduction not just of non-salary expenses, but also of staffing, guided by principles established by the board, and that's what we hope to speak to here in a moment. And then finally, 26 and 27 and beyond, this is a pretty fluid situation. I just learned that the state sub rates are up like considerably, and that's also going to have an impact on us. And we learn these things, we learn them week to week. So it's a kind of unnecessarily a moving target. We hope that there's no very significant changes made by the legislature. That gate could swing both ways. The legislature could do something for us positively. It could also set us back a bit. But we are in the mode of sort of consistently reassessing our position and what we need to do. But we are looking very closely at not just the number of positions we have, but where we charge these positions. Are we appropriately leveraging our categorical dollars? Are we using our lab dollars strategically, our CTE dollars strategically, our title dollars strategically? Do we have a clear vision of what we should and shouldn't be charging to capital? These are all analyses that are occurring now. At this point, just to give you I'm actually going to skip ahead one slide, if I may, and then I'll come back to explain this. So this is what I want to illustrate, something that I think is relevant to Tumwater's situation. I don't know if you're all familiar with OSPI's financial health indicators. So every year, OSPI publishes, once districts close their year, they submit their F-196 report. OSPI gathers that data, aggregates it, puts it on a spreadsheet, and then flags certain districts for financial warning. If you were to go to the website right now and pull up that financial health indicator, not only would Tumwater not be flagged for financial warning, but as you see, it has a total score of 3, which is well higher than every other district that has a financial warning indicator. Why is that? It's because that model is pulling, it's a lagging indicator, right? It's pulling from year-end data from a year ago. So here's a district that has legitimate concerns of going cash negative in the general fund, and yet, the OSPI health indicators, unless you sort of knew what it does, you would be led to believe that things are okay. So it sort of highlights the need for both lagging and leading indicators to know, to track in the moment where you're at. That's what we're trying to implement with the quarterly business analytics dashboard. So every month, we're looking at overtime, cash outs, substitute costs. We're looking at what we're paying out in legal. It's really, the idea is we're trying to get under the hood of the district and provide an analytical structure in real time, rather than waiting to see where we close in the year, looking at it in December, and then realizing too late, right, that something is brewing. We've also given a considerable amount of attention and thought to the communications part of this. The superintendent has been out to the community now twice with budget messages, once in October and once in December, about the evolving nature of this issue. The superintendent and I have also reconvened the Budget Advisory Committee, which has met 3 times now, and has had some very robust discussions about this issue. Ms. Bromley and I have spent the greater part of this week and some of last week meeting with our labor partners, trying to be transparent about the situation that we find ourselves in, reviewing relevant contract language. And also, we're trying to keep our ear to the ground and partner with our state reps, when it comes to that levy lid discussion, the ESD, WASDA, whoever can be an advocate for us, because there are things that the legislature can do to assist us. So at this point, I'd like to talk about what I think our options are going into next year. First, before we get into the options, a little primer. The first is that we derive these from the best information we have available, and once the legislature comes out and says what they're going to do, once the federal government, the new president-elect has been outspoken on education issues, he may have surprises for us. But we think regardless of how those things go, it seems obvious at this point that reductions will be necessary. Our goal is to ground the reductions in a philosophy or a specific goal, rather than just reducing as much as we can or indiscriminately or without having any sort of plan. And the size of the budget problem is a fluid situation. And it's influenced by bargaining, legislative session, inflation, enrollment, and other factors. Now, the goal is driven by the board's policy. I should say there's really sort of 2 things that constitute the goalposts here for what we're trying to achieve. One is a sort of a practical thing of getting what's the term I want to use? Getting off the loan means being cash solvent, right? So we need to get cash solvent before, that is the first goal before we even sort of get to the point of talking about 6% and exactly what's in and out of that 6%. And so that's kind of one part of the goalpost. The second part of the goalpost is to really be clear about this policy, and just so that we're all on the same page, the policy that you have on the books right now does not say that the district shall have a total fund balance of 6%. That is not what this says. I don't know if that was what it was intended to say, or that was the understanding, but that's not the plain meaning of the language. I've highlighted the portion that I'm referencing here, but when the board policy calls out portions of fund balance that are in spendable form but are not legally restricted as to their use, then what that does is it takes the total fund balance and says, okay, exclude anything in that is attributable to a program that is restricted in any way by state or federal law. That would include at least about $3.5 million at this point of money earmarked for New Market Skills Center, money earmarked for any of our state categorical programs, career technical education, learning assistance program, any non-spendable inventory fund balance that we have. So it's a very significant distinction. It's a very significant distinction. So last year, the district ended, I think it's 6.6 million, right? In aggregate, you would think, oh, that's roughly 6%. Under the policy, it wouldn't meet it, okay? So option A, and again, I'm not trying to be too informal, but I'm trying to use phrases that get people to understand what we're talking about. So stop digging. The stop digging phrase means right now we're spending more than we're taking in. So the longer we go at that trajectory, we are creating a bigger hole, right? Digging further into fund balance, okay? So option A is what I would probably describe as the minimal amount that the district would have to do to just establish. This wouldn't even necessarily get rid of the interfund loan. It just eliminates the operating deficit. And right now, the best information we have to act on is we just finished a year where we spent $4.5 million more than we took in. And so we believe at this point we have approximately a $4.5 million operating deficit. The new sub rates will impact that, bargaining will impact that, enrollment will impact that, but that's where we're at right now. So that's stop digging. Option B goes further than that. Not only stop digging, but make some progress. So what would that progress look like, okay? This option says, okay, not only do you eliminate the budget deficit, but you need to build a modest operating surplus so you can get off the loan, right? So if we expect to be negative in cash this year in key months, what would it take to eventually phase into a situation where we're not relying on an interfund loan anymore? So under this scenario, again, with the best information we have now, we think that if you did this option, and I do think this is a sensible option, that you would still need the loan in parts of 25-26, perhaps the entirety of 25-26, but you would be on your way off of it. So at some point, you would be able to retire the interfund loan. We think that would require approximately a $6 million reduction. And then option C, which is now we're talking about the board policy, now we're talking about the 6%, now we're talking about what exactly is in that 6%. This would entail eliminating the budget deficit and then building a larger operating surplus, not just to address the cash insolvency, but now to hit that 6% number. And so we think that that would be approximately $8.5 million. So, we think that, this is in deference to the board's role here, that these are important decisions. They pertain to the board's policy. And so we're seeking to sort of say, okay, what's the goal? And then what should be some guiding principles to guide the work towards that goal? To frame the decisions in a strategic context, to keep a focus on students, to empower the board in their role as the stewards of public funds, and to build trust so that people see this as a transparent conversation. So I thought what might be a good way to proceed here is that I went into, actually the superintendent provided this to me, and then I went and found it on the internet. WASDA, your association, has actually developed, I guess refined over time. Apparently this has been worked on and changed a few times. And they developed these 6 affirmative statements or principles to guide budget development. I thought they were pretty good. We sort of went through them at cabinet and sort of give, does this make sense? Does this feel like, an appropriate set of principles? And at least from a staff perspective, I could see why WASDA landed where they did. But those 6 are to commit to reducing or delaying non-employee related costs first, to consider the long-term sustainability of optional programs offered, and to consider the impacts on students, particularly those with the highest needs. To look at current initiatives and consider which are most impacting on learning, to consider reductions that create closer alignment with the state's prototypical school model. Whenever possible, to use attrition and consider not replacing vacated positions. And finally, to consider the need for appropriate, reasonable, and sustainable levels of reserves to support future decision-making by the board. So I guess the open-ended question, and I would defer to the superintendent or the board chair at this point, is that these seem like sensible principles to guide the work. But the 2 questions that we would ask would be, do you agree? Do these guidelines sufficiently reflect your priorities and values as a body? Or in what ways do these guidelines need to be supplemented or clarified so that the board feels like they've provided the guidance that they feel like they need to provide to guide this important process?
Do you want a conversation on option A, B, option 1, 2, 3?
Both.
For this, or just 10?
Microphone.
Yeah, so really, if I were to say what is a desired outcome of this evening, I mean, obviously that's the board's prerogative, but we would like some input on A, B, C, and we would like some input on the guiding principles to the extent that you're comfortable providing that at this time.
Can you go back to the ABC,
Yes.
please? Does anyone have questions for Ben before we start our conversation? Does everyone understand what we're doing here?
Could I see the slide on the guiding principles again, the 6? I only was able to
That's fine, yeah,
comprehend 3.
absolutely.
Sorry.
And I tried to find the URL to link them, but I couldn't find, it's just, I have a PDF from the superintendent that he handed me. I couldn't find it on the web, so I literally had to retype them and put them up there. But I know they're from a WASDA subcommittee that, I guess, worked to develop these examples for school
It's
boards.
part of one of the WASDA budget trainings. Where do we want to start? Do we want to start with guiding principles or with ABC?
I recommend starting with guiding principles rather than going straight to the money.
Mm-hmm. Does that sound good to everyone?
Yeah.
All right. So first, does anyone have any questions about what any of these mean?
I think it's more painful, or even more painful.
For
To say it, but that's
for-
gonna.
for 1 through 6?
No, I thought we're talking about option A, B, C.
No, we're talking about guiding principles first.
Okay, the alignment vision? Okay.
Yeah, what's on the screen? Does anyone have questions about what any of these mean?
Number 4. Maybe unpack that one just a little bit, like in terms of, have we been enhancing things too much in certain areas? Is that kind of what it's talking through with respect to staffing closer to the state prototypical model?
Yes. I think, I wasn't part of the development of this, but I'll tell you how I respond to it. We definitely have programs where our financial commitment to that program is beyond the money we receive to run the program. to be fair, that's not entirely unusual in school districts, but also it's a matter of degree. And a classic example is our commitment to our special needs students, right? The federal and state government don't do a particularly robust job of funding those needs. Our expenses for that program consistently outpace by a considerable margin the revenue that we receive for that. You could go down the list of other programs, from food service to our language learner program to a few others, where essentially basic ed ends up supporting, or the local levy ends up supporting these enhancements, some of which are relatively recent, others of which have been around for a while.
So one of the things that is interesting is number 2 kind of addresses that, but it's speaking to the optional programs, and I would think that having some kind of a combination of those, in fact, I would prioritize the non-optional programs to say, step 1, trying to consider reductions that closer align, taking into consideration the impact on students, particularly those with the highest needs. So that would make me feel a little more comfortable to have that specifically in there.
Can you, so if I were going to try to model that, I would be taking number 2 and number 4 and essentially kind of combining them.
Yeah, because the word optional or optional programs, like maybe that is what does that mean by optional?
Okay.
So, where is the quote from? Who's, you have it within quotes? That's from WASDA saying that?
Yeah,
So
this is from a WASDA
So they
publication.
termed the,
It's
Optional
let
programs.
me just say, it's a WASDA training material. So I just want to be clear about that.
so we can change the wording from optional to enhanced or something like that to more reflect what our district focus is? Because we would, I don't think as a board, we would consider special ed stuff as optional.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying, that we're trying to fund it more to help the kids more.
I think that's what Darby was meaning, putting together 4, which is prototypical school model, and then
Basically, the second half of the sentence
Yeah.
of number 2 and sticking it at the end of number 4.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
I think an example of an optional program was TVA a few years ago. It was not sustainable. We did not have the enrollment to sustain it, and so
We cut that
was cut.
out,
Yeah,
yes.
right. So I think that is what optional means. Special ed, definitely not optional. When I was looking at these, I was wondering, is there something, and I don't know what the words are, considering our goals of, trying to close gaps, is there something that we can put in here? And it's likely what is meant by, we will consider the impact on students, particularly those with the highest needs. But I'm wondering if there's something that we can put that, considering our goals of closing the graduation gaps. I don't know what the right wording is, if someone else has better wording, or if you have questions about what I mean.
Was maybe part of the idea is as resources become available, so let's just say the situation gets better, that we prioritize resources, align, and I think in many ways what we'll be talking about is alignment to the strategic plan that ultimately will be developed by April-ish of this year, that we see that because I think we're going to see strategic plan goals and outcomes that are aligned to what you're talking about.
Right, and maybe those are the last cuts,
Yeah.
like, those are the last cuts made.
Yeah,
Those are not
this
the
is-
first ones,
I
right?
think it's more of not necessarily when things are getting better, but because this is a budget reduction exercise that we're going to be looking at with these three scenarios. So making sure to prioritize students that we've already identified have the most significant gaps.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can do is come up with like another, kind of use this conversation today and come back at another, at a future meeting with sort of, do these principles match with what you want to see as we further this budget development? They were capturing some notes on maybe that concepts of what you're talking about, and we can come up with a guiding principle, or you can also provide us some of that as well after this meeting. So we don't do some wordsmithing tonight. I don't know if people want to necessarily hear that today.
I don't want a wordsmith in a meeting, no.
So I think one thing, too, we might want to address would be efforts to increase efficiencies. That's always, coming from the private sector, that's something that a lot of times folks in the government don't talk about too much. But instead of making cut, you can increase productivity, increase efficiencies, and that then makes the money go farther. So I don't know if there's some kind of brainstorming or something that the district could do, have like our staff come up with ideas that a lot of times they think would help, or your committee, come up with ways to increase efficiencies too and productivity. What would make it more, how the teaching staff, for example, could be more efficient in helping kids with special needs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think maybe is that sort of adding some additional words to number one, which really is reducing non-employee related costs first.
Right.
So that's really around what you're talking about is efficiency of non-employee.
Well, no,
Really?
actually, it's increasing the efficiency of the employees. Like for example, we figured out a way to help our, Ben's, was participating in this too, to help our transportation department be more efficient. And look what's happened now. In a year's time, we're on time. So we did a lot of brainstorming as far as increasing the efficiency of our transportation situation. I think we can do a thoughtful process of thinking about how to make certain things that we do more efficient. So that's, again, something that would, and you can draw from, WASDA or even the private sector ideas of how they've made their stuff more efficient.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure the wording of this, and I guess in essence, I feel like when we're talking about the significance of the cuts we're talking about, whether it's 4.5 million to 8.5 million, in essence, for us to accomplish any of those scenarios, we will inevitably become more efficient because the kids are going to be showing up. Like the same number of kids, like we're not expecting a decline in enrollment. So the same number of kids are going to show up a year from now with that kind of reduction. Inevitably, there's less staff to support them, teach them, service them, all of these factors. And so the only way we will have to have efficiencies improved, or people are going to have to take on additional duties. I mean, there's lots of factors that we'll have to consider that are almost built into this process. Does that make sense?
Kind of, sort of, but I still think that you're better off to specifically come up with efficiencies that you can do and let people know what they are.
Okay.
And let them participate in their ideas. And that's, nobody does better than the person who does the job. What are things that can be done to help me be more efficient?
Okay.
And that's what I'm thinking. I don't think it just happens. I could be, I understand where you're coming from, but I think if you're focused on stuff, then you have more chance that it's going to happen.
If you have thoughts about what that looks like in terms of these guiding principles, I mean, we have this conversation. We'll take some notes and we'll see if we can come up with something. But if you have something more thoughtful on this,
So I think number 3, for example, you could put in there something along the lines which we will look at our current initiatives, consider which are most impacting learning, and something along there, such as improving the efficiencies of our learning process. So, and that's, again, get people thinking about ways that they can improve that don't cost anymore. And if we're lucky, maybe they cost a little bit less, but not in today's world. But that's my thinking, is that it's amazing how helpful and smart the people who actually are the worker bees, which, that's again what I do in my job, and I can think of a lot of ways that the company can save money and still provide better service. So in our case, we want to provide the same service, and if we can improve it to meet the goals of the district, then I'm sure that there's a very deep value in asking our folks that work with us to, come up with ideas that what can make their job better. That's what I kind of led off with my staff this year. I said, if this were your dream job, what are the things that would make it a dream job for you? And you'd be surprised what people will come up with. It's stuff you didn't even think about, And that's where I'm thinking of, that if we can use the brains of our district. Yeah. It's not a major point, but I think it could improve the cost by 20%, reduce our cost by 20%, which that's a big help. Just listening to people, what they can do to make their job better.
Director Keel, Director Taylor, anything?
I like what Jill was saying about number 3, maybe replace initiatives with strategic plan or something around that. I think would help make it more clear. I think some of these were passed already, so whenever possible, use attrition and consider not replacing. I think we're past that. We're already doing it. You're not going to get guidance. The board's not going to help you with that. That's just kind of a strategy we've already taken at this point, or we should. I like the ones that are associated to data that we can then quantify a little bit and see that. I think 4 is a good one that we can relate to data. And again, going number 1, I think that's something we're already doing, or at least that's what we've said. We're trying to make cuts away from the classroom and employees as far away as possible. So again, that one's already, I don't think you need guidance from the board on that one. I have questions around 6. Is 6 just about our minimum fund balance policy? Is that kind of it in a nutshell?
Yeah, again, this is a WASDA training, but I could tell you how I respond to it. I think it's like just the governing body, in this case the board, having a good reason for their fund balance policy, understanding what it is and supporting what it is and standing behind it, basically. So that in your view, it constitutes appropriate, reasonable, and sustainable levels of reserves.
Right. So again, I think that's one we're already doing. We have one established. We're trying to strive towards that. That's why we're doing a lot of this process. So I think we're already doing some of these. So I like moving forward in 3 and 4. And then I think 2 needs some work on that wordsmithing a little bit. And I think we all want the same thing or similar. And so that's just my feedback on 2. I need that clarified a little bit more. It needs to be more tailored or customized to Tumwater versus just a WASDA training. So.
What do you mean the first part? Because we moved the second part down into number 4. You're talking about the first part of that. We will consider the long-term sustainability of optional program offered.
Yeah.
Programs offered.
And I think that kind of you put it with 4. It makes it, if it's optional, it's
not prototypical.
It's not prototypical, and so I think that helps move that sentence along. The part that needs, I think, work is the second sentence on the impact, in particular those with the highest needs. Again, I think this one might be data-driven a little bit. We could maybe get some data points to this on high needs, although I don't know if we're going to be fortunate enough to be in that position to, get down and determine high needs versus regular needs. I think, I don't know if maybe that gets more into the options, I guess, the option A, B, or C, potentially. I just have concerns about, too, getting wordsmithed out.
And I think if you go back to kind of the purpose of this is really for you to really give some clear guidance to myself and this team as we work to develop, right, this ongoing budget is you as a group have decided these are really important concepts for us to really take And again, I think the clarity of that will help us in developing a budget that meets your needs. Right, that is alignment, that we're all on the same page, that we develop a budget that said, yep, that this is, we have agreed that for the decision, because we're going to make a lot of tough decisions, and we value these programs. There's not a lot of excess and just waste and people like that. That really doesn't exist. So we are trying to make some really tough decisions. So that's really getting some clarity around guiding principles that will help us in that process to the best of our ability. And I think that what you're talking about, I agree. I think as we tweak some of those are helpful as we start to prioritize different decision-making rather than a blanket. If you just said, we believe that the district should cut 10% across the board, right? That could be a guiding principle that we'd be like, not super comfortable with that. We want the leverage that that aligns with what you're thinking. It's like, we don't want you to cut everything equal. That is not, like, we're not looking for blanket reduction that we see. It is more nuanced in this, and that's, I think, that way. And so the details of this are helpful as we start to develop processes.
And my answer was very confusing. I kind of jumped all around the place. If I were to give my summary of thoughts, I would say, I would look at these as priorities, almost which ones do we prioritize? And to me, I would think you get a lot of clarity prioritizing 4 as your leading priority, and then whatever the combination of 2 and 3 looks like. So yes, the prototypical school model, but then where do we want to spend local levy funds where we think it's strategically the best? Which follows our strategic plan? Those with highest needs. I'll give you the flexibility there, but then I think 4 is kind of the one that summarizes this up best for me as to what the top priority is, or the top principle.
So I think also on point number 2, kind of follow up with what Darby was saying too, that instead of optional programs, maybe we term it enhanced programs, not optional, based upon district goals and our plan, district plan.
Can you do that one more time? So
Yeah.
in reference to.
So
Number 2.
Number
2.
Or 3, too, I guess. A little
Yeah,
bit,
so
it sounds
number
like.
2 is we will consider long-term sustainability of our district enhanced programs.
Okay.
And based upon, again, this is what real important to the board, based upon district goals and our district plan. So
Strategic plan.
that gives us the
Strategic plan.
focus when Kevin's trying to work on this, that we're gonna, if we do cuts and stuff, that it's based upon what our goals are. We still, want to achieve the goals of the board, all those different things like graduation levels, and improving the test scores if we can, et cetera, helping the special ed kids, to do it the best they can, right? So I think that by putting that word, our goals that we've worked so hard on, Darby during her term as president, she worked so hard for that year to get our goals nice and concise and specified, that if we reference that helps give you guidance as far as when we're making cuts and stuff.
Okay, so Darby has to leave, and so I just, your thoughts, do you have any thoughts on A, B, and C before you leave? We can continue this after Darby leaves, but she has to leave.
Unfortunately, nothing I can summarize quickly, because there's
Okay.
a ton of detail there, so I will entrust you all to carry on.
All right. Thank you. Okay, anything else on guiding principles?
When we say enhanced or optional programs, what we're talking about is, like you discussed earlier, the programs that we fund beyond what we're given to fund them. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then also, I don't know if this would be a guiding principle, or obviously, if we follow these principles or the revised version of them, the goal is to have a product or an outcome of A, B, or C, whichever one we decide. Is there a way to have a shorter term accountability or tracking of those decisions that are being made, and a dollar value specified maybe with those decisions? Like we had 4 positions that went unfilled, that'll save us X amount of dollars. Or we cut this program, that's going to save us $20,000. So that when we are making these decisions, we have, I don't know if it's monthly or quarterly, but we've made these decisions, and this is the outcome of that, or the projected outcome of that, excuse me. Is that something that's been provided in the past or can be provided, or do we break it down that consistently?
Well, yeah, so, I mean, what you're describing right now is a lot of what we're spending every hour doing right now, is trying to sort of think about those. As I hope this answers your question, but I'm trying to give it a practical spin on, like, it's not uncommon for districts to come forward and say, we're going to do these 6 things, and it's going to save X, and then it turns out not to save X for a variety of reasons, some of which are, not because somebody didn't do something right, but because the landscape has changed. Special education is a very typical example of that, where because staffing is driven by IEPs, there can be changing laws, there can be federal court decisions. You think you might be saving something, and then it turns out you're not. So we would have to do sort of like iterative reassessments of like where we're at relative to those decisions. And I would expect that those would kind of come in the form of board work sessions, not entirely dissimilar from what we're doing now. But that level of detail, I mean, to be clear about it, like whether you sort of empower the superintendent with a set of priorities, and you tell the superintendent, and the superintendent tells me, we want you to work with these principals with the goals that we've given, versus some other model, is for you all to work out in the superintendent board relationship. But in terms of the follow-up of it, and in terms of we're all about that right now. We've got our finger on every pulse that exists, and we will know, I would say roughly, quarterly, whether the changes that we're putting in place are having the effect that we thought that they would. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And for nobody's particular fault, it's just the requirements can change.
Were you talking about like monthly updates during the process, or monthly updates next year as we're overseeing the budget?
Yeah, I guess what I'm talking about is kind of checking the progress. Like, we can give you these guiding principles and you can start making decisions, but I don't want to be surprised as we get further along that we're making decisions that aren't really making an impact.
Well,
I just want to really
Go ahead.
understand.
Yeah.
You're talking about next year, though. This budget we're talking about the budget for next year.
Correct.
So you're talking, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But we're making decisions right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what we want to kind of, we'll have to figure this out a little bit, because the guiding principles will guide us. We will end up developing a plan that will meet the guiding principles to the best of our ability, and to like that option A, B, or C.
Mm-hmm.
With what you already heard Ben talk about, that subject to change due to a long range of variety of reasons. And so I think, one, you will start to see not only as early as January our beginning aspects of this plan, and I would say is probably at a bit higher level than individual positions. You'll see some numbers, you will see estimated cost savings, and broader. Again, I haven't seen this, we haven't developed this yet, but I'm kind of anticipating the board's role in this is not at a position, school, that kind of level. It's a little bit broader, but you will get an essence of this is the reduction, percentage reduction, dollars saved, estimated in this process. And then as we go into next year, you will get updates around, are we achieving the savings that we said we are? And you should see that in real time in a variety of metrics. So I think it won't be quite to that position, because I think we really want to make sure, I think it's the board superintendent relations is really clear around that we don't, your job is you hired me and operational, and then that we do that decision making. And so we kind of have this back and forth around how do we support and create a program that matches with what you're asking me to create, and then allowing me to do that work. And so I try, again, it's a little, I know it's messy, and it's going to be a bit messy. I don't know if that helps.
I think, so we did guiding principles like a few years ago. We haven't really given guiding principles, for a couple of years. So this, like, we're all kind of trying to figure this out. Once we give them the guiding principles, we won't, because of the legislature and how everything works, they're going to be working and they're going to come up with scenarios that won't be real until May, until the legislature figures out what they're going to do. And then we'll start seeing some real budgets come through, and we'll be getting presentations. In the end, what I don't want is for them to bring a budget to us and we say, no way, we're not going to approve it because you didn't do this. This is our time to tell them what it is we expect to see. And it won't be perfect. We'll learn for next year. But sticking to the state's prototypical school model seems like an easy one, but we could say, actually, we don't care about the prototypical school model. We want to make sure that we have X number of whatever staff, regardless, right? We could have a model like that, or we could have a guiding principle like that. So that's what it's hard to think about, which is, why I really wanted, I was glad that Ben got the presentation out so we could think about it, because it is hard to think in this way. But it's so when they bring the budget and they feel like all the work that they're going to do over the next few months, they feel like they have done what they feel the board wants. Because otherwise they are sitting there, I don't know. It's been hard the last couple of years without guiding principles.
Yeah, and I think, again, they can have a really significant impact. And I have some Oregon experience, and one of the things that was really common in Oregon districts was for school boards or across the state to cut days. And that you could unilaterally do that and basically get approval from the state kind of after the fact. And so districts would oftentimes, hey, this is the money that we get. We can only afford to go 170 days, so we are cutting 10 days from the school calendar. Away we go, and that's the savings. And so oftentimes districts that I've been associated with would create a guiding principle that says we will have a full calendar school year and a full, right? So those kinds of even parameters. I don't know if that's not necessary in this. I know it's not quite as easy in Washington to do that kind of work. So again, it's different processes that have occurred. So if there's something of value to you at the broader level, and I don't know what good examples of that are. I mean, you could, if you were let's just say an early education advocate, you could be asking the board to prioritize early education, our K2 kids or K1 students. And again, that we may want some clarity about that, or you allow us the option to, like, as we look at this, are we going to prioritize K1 students in this process? So those are like guiding principles that can shape the work that we do as a group.
Anything else about guiding principles? If you think of anything else based on this conversation, then let Kevin know, because we're going to be bringing back a refined list to the board meeting. Is that
Yeah, we'll come up with the timing. I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the timing of when that comes back. But
Okay.
This is sort of a quick first conversation draft. We'll have another opportunity to refine these.
Yeah, okay.
I think this gives us some good initial conversation and guidance.
Are we only going till 6:30?
We were planned to go till 6:30. I mean,
Okay.
obviously, this board can go as long as you choose to go.
All right. Now we're to option A, B, and C. Anyone want to start?
I'll go ahead and start.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, the first one, there we go. Option A, that's kind of the lowest goal. And what that does is it creates greater uncertainty for the following year. Option 2 costs another $2 million, so that depending on the timing, that we have to be careful and not be too drastic and try to cut too much too soon, because things happen, things change. And so we don't want to make these big cuts and then all of a sudden have to hire 20 new people because all of a sudden the state gives us more money and we get a higher growth of our students. However, that being said, I think option C is unobtainable. It would be just too much, too drastic. And again, with the longer-term, midterm variables that could change, I don't support that one. And I'm doing the math, we're trying to figure out how to make up the 4 million and then possibly 6 million, that's another 2, right? And so that is still going to be really difficult to do, I think really difficult. And again, the school district, the studies on budgets and stuff I've been doing, that the school district, we're not alone. It's almost every entity is now facing the same thing. You hear in the paper that, even Amazon is cutting staff, that the super growth companies. So we're in good company, let's put it that way. And I liked how Ben presented that we were 3, which made us look really good, right? And then, but the point of that too is that the financial crises, that they come exactly from following the lagging indicators, not looking at the leading indicators. So that's really important that we have a wake-up call, right? That we thought we were doing okay, but we were not because whatever. It's just, a lot of it's just the times. Okay, so I'm supportive of somewhere in option B. Okay, and I'm not thinking of, maybe 6, we might aim for 5. I don't know, that's, for the board to determine. But then to make it so that it's phased in, that we're not front-ending the drastic cuts to get there, that we would kind of phase in so that we can see how things develop as time goes on.
Gentlemen?
Yeah, so I'm going to back up a little bit here. These budget options A, B, and C, these are for this school year, for the 25-26. So this is for the 25-26. It doesn't have anything to do with this year. And so with that, option A and option B don't talk about meeting a policy. So, and option C says we meet the policy. So is my assumption that option A and option B do not meet the minimum fund balance policy in August of 26?
Correct. Just so we're clear, option B does have the goal of meeting the policy. It just doesn't do it immediately. Does that make this? So it's a speed issue.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that clarification, Ben. That helps. Where did these options come from?
My brain.
There we go. So perfect.
I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah.
As well.
That was a terrible misstep because one of them was Kira's. So I would like to quickly recant my response. But just so we're clear, option A, I mean, just to make it super clear, if you don't do option A, you just get further and further in cash insolvency. We're clear about that, right? Like A is.
It was actually one of the budget parameters that I found as part of the WASDA training is like your revenues equal expenditures. So that was one of the budget parameter ideas, and they pulled it out because for this conversation.
I wonder if we could argue that could even be a guiding principle.
So I think we're giving them a guiding principle by choosing one of these options.
Okay.
Does that make, right? Is that, yeah.
I mean, just as a matter of practice, they should always be
Well,
spending.
Go ahead, say that again.
We should always be spending less money than we're bringing in.
except when we have a really large fund balance and we need to
I mean,
spend
over the course of the whole budget, the whole year.
There have been times that we've added to fund balance, in which case we've had to spend it down. So it will be a great time when that happens.
Because
So,
the policy doesn't say that it has to have that 6% at all times,
No.
right?
Correct.
It's just at the end of the
Year
year.
end.
yeah.
Correct.
So I'm
Fiscal-
talking-
fiscal
Yeah,
year.
so I'm talking about the whole year then, because at some point you're going to have more spending, or less spending and more spending.
So can you complete that thought? What was your suggested guiding principle?
We should always be spending less than we take in.
Yes.
Are you meaning every month?
No.
No.
Overall?
On an annual basis.
The budget. We're talking
Year.
about creating a budget.
Yep.
We're not talking
25,
about.
26 budget.
Yeah,
I mean, Ben
yeah.
said the same thing, kind of. He said, option A is the floor. I mean, I'm essentially saying that we should just iron that in there and say that it's going to be option A no matter what, at minimum. You can't have anything less.
Yeah, if you don't do option A, you're headed for binding conditions. That's the truth of the matter. So, I mean, unless the spirit of option A, unless you eliminate your operating deficit, you're already going to attempt cash insolvency this year. If you don't dig from that, then you just dig further into that.
And if we don't choose B or C, then do we need to change policy? Because if we just choose A, we're not going to meet policy, like Casey was saying.
Yeah, we've had to do that before.
We've done it with a plan in place, how it's going to get corrected is when we've done it. I want to go back to Ben's big brain.
And Kira's.
Don't get me in trouble.
So has the Budget Advisory Committee give input on this at all?
Because
They
we had
have,
a
all right.
lengthy discussion about this, actually.
And so usually when I present options to a group that is giving direction, there's a recommendation, and what is the recommendation from a consensus, or what, is there varying recommendations?
I mean, I have a recommendation. So I think A and C both pose some dangers, right? A poses a danger in the sense that, like, you're always right on the edge of, did we do enough to actually, like, stay, like, financially viable? C poses a different danger, which is sort of what Director Adams was talking about, which is that, you don't want to cut too aggressively too quickly, because, okay, what are you doing when you do that? You are going to create a larger operating surplus just to get to the endpoint fast, right? Well, then you're at the endpoint. What are you going to do? Start adding staff back? It starts to create a bit of a yo-yo. And I think generally speaking, that's not where you want to be. Now, it's an option because it is the board policy, and we don't want to assume too much about, we can just not meet board policy, right? But it seems sensible to me that you would not act too rashly, but also not act. And option B is like, okay, you recognize you have an operating deficit. You're going to seek to eliminate that operating deficit, and you're going to seek to make gains on the fund balance policy, but you're not going to assume that you're going to be there overnight, as it were, like at the end of next school year. And so I think option B is the probably, I mean, I don't want to stick my neck out because maybe you were about to see option C, but like from my perspective, option B is probably the most cautious and sensible. Option C is aggressive, Oh, you have one.
Option B would require, continued work into the next year with attrition, or, we would continue to need to eliminate different costs the following year, because we would, it would help cash flow, but we would just continue to have to cut.
Good point.
Is the cost on the bottom of each one, is that what the cuts would need to be to meet the
Roughly.
goal of the option?
Roughly. Maybe one other thing I should say is that they're not all cuts.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
The reduction in budget is what it is.
So it's a combination of cuts, of elimination of programs. In some cases, it's paying for it in a different way. Sometimes it's doing a program in a different way, but not eliminating it. So cuts is not exactly, I mean, we're trying to devise, there's a lot of time being spent on ways of saving money that don't actually cut a person or a program. There are those as well, but it's anything that reduces the burden on our basic ed funding. And there's a variety of ways to get to that.
So would one example be, for example, that we might extend the payment period on certain things? So instead of like that something is due to be paid by August, that we would go on a payment plan. That's really common with people when you refinance debt, is you can extend the payment period to get you through your cash flow tough times.
Yes.
So that's I think what you're saying is we may not cut, but we may negotiate extending the payment periods on certain things.
Yes, that's a great point. Can I take us to the slide that, okay, so here's an example of what you're saying. So we have two separate but related problems. The first is a cash flow problem. The second is we have a budget deficit, regardless of the cash flow, right? What you're talking about is absolutely relevant to the cash flow problem, and I'll give you an example. So we were sent our insurance bill in September. Our provider does not allow like installment payments. They send the bill, there's a due date, you pay it. It comes in September. That was a contributing factor to having less than $1 million at the end of September. Now, not much we could do. We got the bill, we paid it, but we want to explore whether or not, I mean, there's only two major providers of insurance in this state, but would another provider allow us to pay half in the fall, half in the spring,
Quarterly payments,
whatever,
whatever.
quarterly? That's not going to eliminate that's really actually not going to affect our operating deficit at all, but it will help us get out of the loan quicker.
Right.
And so, thank you, that is absolutely what we're doing.
The minimum fund balance policy was created for a reason, and that's the board's job is to create policy, and that helps keep a sound budget. I don't like that the budget is dictating policy, when policy should probably more dictate the budget. So I would prefer option C, but I understand it's aggressive. I'm more open to other options that come closer to being compliant with the minimum fund balance policy. And that's just me, but there's a reason for that. So we'd have to almost backtrack and lose ground there, just for the sake of we still have to balance this budget one way or the other. If it's fast or slow, it needs to be done.
Correct.
And so that's my concern, that again, this budget is kind of going to dictate policy, and that's not my preference.
Good point. We need at least option B. We have to pay interest to the capital budget on this loan. So every day that we have this money in general fund, we owe the capital fund money. So the sooner we get out of that loan, the better.
Speaking of that loan, who comes up with the terms for that? Is that something, Ben, that you guys come up? It looks like
Kira does.
No, it's actually the county.
Okay.
So the county will advise us on what, over that period of time, what the interest rate was, and that's what we'll go ahead and charge.
Okay.
Charge general fund to pay back capital.
Okay.
It's what that money would have earned in the capital fund if it just sat there.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so then who decides what the monthly payments are and how long the term is then, I guess? Is that up to us? The county dictates the rate?
Yes.
We can come up with, we can pay it back in 2 months or 2 years,
Correct.
potentially, maybe not those exact, but,
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
and then that is something that Ben and Kira would come up with? Or is that
I'm sorry, what,
Who would come, so is that something you guys would come up with and change and look at and analyze over time?
yes, so there are stipulations where we'd have to have it paid off by the end of the year.
Okay,
So there is guidance and, statute that we do have to follow to get that paid, but, those are, the interest itself and how we pay that back it comes from guidance from the county as well.
Okay.
The law says has to be paid within a calendar year.
Gotcha. So, sorry, I got one more then based on that. So, so we would be looking to do an interfund loan here later this month, and it would have to be paid back within the year. Would we then, is there potential or is there an option for do another one? Is there a limit to that? Would another interfund loan help us stretch or,
Yes.
get closer to a minimum fund balance that's by policy by 26?
Yes, so we would have to, the following year, so we'd pay back the loan at the end of this year, and then we would then reissue the loan in next year, in 25, 26, to help the cash flow. And then at that point, depending on how, with the cuts and how we, how the projections look, we can decide at that point as when it would be best to pay it back. And of course, we'd want to pay it back as soon as we could so that we don't accrue additional interest.
Thank you.
Of course.
So I'm going to say that for us to do an additional loan to get up to the 8.5 million would be not prudent.
That's not, that's not what we would be doing, right?
No.
We're not going to borrow money to, no.
Yeah, no, so the interfund loan is only helping us with the cash flow piece of it, so that we, as we make the, looking at A, B, and C with our different options, that's actually helping fix the deficit, to get the deficit that we'll have at the end of the year. So the cash flow and the interfund loan are two separate issues. So we would, we'll have to get that second loan for cash flow and probably be fine, but, 25 or 26 by mid-year. Yeah, by mid-year. So does that answer your question, hopefully?
Well, that's if we make the cuts that are necessary to get there.
Exactly. Yeah,
That
and
has to
that's,
happen.
with option B, I figured we'd be about halfway through the year with the interfund loan in 25, 26.
Right.
My projections would. No, I'm not making a promise. I'm hoping.
For expert opinion.
Yeah, but
With-
whether
with the-
whether we take out that second loan or not doesn't really change anything about.
The cuts we have to make.
Right. Just based on what we know now.
Director Keel? You said definitely A, that's a guiding principle, but what do you feel about B and C?
I mean, I think it's some variation of B. I don't know if exactly 6 million is the number. But I think B, I'm a little concerned, like Director Taylor said, and just, I know we're not ignoring the policy, but we would have to vote to not adhere to the policy. I mean, the policy's there for a reason, I get it, and we're in a little bit of a mess here, but that bothers me. But I would say something around option B, or potentially even between option B and C, is kind of where I would be leaning.
Yeah, I'm leaning between B and C as well, because we're going to go through all of this pain this year and then have to do it a whole nother year, so I just wonder about that,
Can I comment on that?
Yes, please.
So, yeah, we've been thinking about that too. Like, we don't want to string this out a long
Right.
time.
Yeah.
So the key thing here is getting above water on the operating deficit, right? Once we are spending less than we bring in, even if it's a nominal amount, we're guaranteed to make progress towards our goal, right? That's the, now if we literally go 1-to-1, if the option A is like you literally not making, but if we get to a spot where we are making something, we're not going to be able to predict this to the dime, right? But if we get above water and we can see that that we're making progress to the policy, then the board's going to have much more latitude in towards how many more cuts it has to make, right? You see that? Once you're above water and once you're making progress, the board has much more, a little cushion when it has to go back and say, well, do we want to make cuts when we are making gain? We're making gain towards the goal. We're headed in the right direction. Cuts at that point only accelerate the rate at which you achieve your fund balance policy, but at least you're headed in the right direction. And that puts a totally different framing on cuts than if you're still digging. So the philosophically, the idea behind option B was not only like get flat, but get in the spot where you're making some gain. We don't know exactly how much gain we'll be making, but we're making, we're spending less than we're bringing in. And so at that point, it becomes the board's discretion. Okay, you want to make more cuts, that will accelerate the progress to the policy, but you know that you're on the right train tracks.
So are you would we look at one version of the budget early on that is closer to B, and then do we see how comfortable we are with it and how comfortable we are moving, going even deeper, or if that is as far as we want to go? Is that what you're saying?
I'm actually not proposing developing multiple budgets. I'm just proposing that we would develop budget's like a 4-month process, right? So we would develop a budget consistent with, if this was the will of the board, a version of option B that ensures that we make progress towards, we're not digging deep and we're making progress towards the board's fund balance policy, but not guaranteed to meet it at the end of that year. That allows the board to come back in the following year, assess how much progress they actually made, sort of like, hey, I had this diet, but did I really lose that weight, right? But if you really are making that gain, then you're under much less pressure to make significant cuts at that point.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So do we do a motion, or do we just make it
No,
informal?
we're just having a conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're looking for general, again, in this process, it's sort of like a little straw vote. It's like, yes, move forward. Like we're not really doing a vote. It's like, move forward with this kind of consensus of the board, move forward with this, and we'll do our best ability to kind of do the will of the board in this process. So if you say option B, that's our work will begin developing this. And we know, again, I'll just kind of reiterate, lots of things can change in the next, and it will change over the next number of months. And so this will be an ongoing conversation. But our initial work, and again, we have all of our representatives from all of our employee groups, and I think they're very anxious to see and hear kind of how this process rolls out in what we hope is kind of a worst case scenario. And then there's sort of that it gets things as things change. So they want that information somewhat soon for a variety of reasons. So this gives us like an idea of begin this work in this frame. Because again, each of these options requires us to do different work.
I'm hearing a couple of us really want us to be meeting the policy. And so what I'm wondering, I heard you say between B and C. Are you between B and C or are you C?
You kind of hit it there. I'm
Yeah.
between B and C as well, too.
Okay.
The priority would meet the policy. So I guess if you can do option B and meet the policy, that would be
Which I don't-
my dream, but I realize that's not an option. So I'm between B and C with an emphasis on meeting the policy.
And
Sure.
And I don't know if this helps, but it may not, like, at a couple of points in this conversation, which has been very good and very helpful, I appreciate it. It's not that option B ignores the policy. It's that it does not guarantee the compliance immediately. So if it helps to phrase it as compliance with the policy over a period,
Yeah.
that's different than saying that it doesn't, it ignores the policy. And I feel like it's not intending to ignore the policy. A ignores the policy, right? B says, we got to make progress because we have a policy that we have to meet. The question is not that there is or isn't a policy. The question is the speed with which you meet that policy.
So one other thing, we have to remember, at the time we set the policy, the financial situation before us was much different. We were at the 4% level. We thought we had successfully been meeting that, and thus we thought it was prudent, in order to help our bond chances of having a higher rating, that we thought it was prudent to add the 6 to the 6 level. So the 6 is not something that, again, times change, and my thinking is that it still can be a policy. We can also change it, like we went from 4 to 6, or we can view it as we're just on a timeline that's slightly longer, so that we don't make cuts that we may regret, because we don't, as it turns out, we may not need them, or the economy can get worse and we could be in worse shape. We just don't know. But I think it's more of a situation of the timeline that I think we're still in agreement on trying to attain the 6%. But whether we meet it in budget year 26, 27 or 27, 28, maybe the times require that we have that flexibility.
Kind of like you talked about, B is showing progress toward meeting the policy. Is there some kind of a goal of hitting a percentage of the policy after year one? Maybe we have a goal of hitting, I don't know what the number is, maybe it's 60% of the policy or 70% of the policy or 50%. The number doesn't really matter right now in this context, but discussing some kind of if we're going to allow us to miss the policy, then have some kind of progress toward it so that we could move forward the next year with the goal of hitting it the following year. I think there also needs to be some point of clarification on the policy in regards to some of the stuff you were talking about.
Yeah.
What reality is versus what it actually says.
Right.
And what was.
Can you go back to the policy slide?
I wasn't here or part of this when that happened, but it seems like there's some misunderstanding as maybe what the board wanted at the time or what it actually says versus what the intent was.
Yeah.
So I think clearing that up a little bit would help.
Yeah, when I got here, people would just basically take the total expenditures, divide the fund balance, and if whatever that percent was, yay, we got 6, and that's not what your policy is.
No,
Like, it's
the
very
budget.
different than
Yeah,
that.
Yeah.
And we've had months this year where literally the amount reserved for the New Market Skills Center is more than our total cash reserve in the district, so it's a very significant part of the financial landscape of the district. So you asked the question, Director Taylor, about like, what's the point of that guiding principle, about reserves and all that? Like, I think it was
Yeah, number 6.
Yeah, and I think this is it, is like the board understands and owns its definition of what a reasonable and sustainable level of reserve is. And so the current policy basically says that you would have, and it actually speaks to budgeted, that's the other thing.
Yeah, it's
Oops, did I just,
budget.
what did I just do? How do I,
Go back into the slideshow.
I'm sorry. There we go. I was going back to the fund
You're
balance
going-
policy, right?
Yeah.
Where was that slide? There we go. So I think right now, the total number of things that we would consider to be restricted as to their use. I think that was like $3.5 million. So we closed at 6.6, 3.5 of that meets the exclusionary language in the board's policy. So like right away, you're almost half of that. So, you start thinking about, okay, is that what was intended? I don't know what was intended because I wasn't here when it was rewritten, but it's a very material change to the policy, whereas, most people didn't think it was. It's actually very material. So to be able to comply with this, we'd have to be able to come and say, okay, here's 6% of fund balance, and here's fund balance above and beyond that 6% that is associated with these pots of money that are legally restricted by state or federal money. So if 6% was 6 million, just for round numbers, then you'd add all of the restricted
New
categorical,
market money.
right?
Yeah.
And you'd be up, you'd be up the $9-10 million range for a, maybe less than that. But don't
Yeah.
quote me, it's just conceptual here.
You're right.
Is that what was intended, right? So if that was what the board intends, then you meet that guiding principle. If you're unclear about what that meant, and you're like, I didn't really mean that. I really meant for you to kind of separate out the skill center, but I wasn't so meaning that you'd separate out lap money or, whatever. But the Budget Advisory Committee spent like an hour on this. And it was a lot about like each one of these pots, like, well, what really makes sense to separate and what is like, doesn't make sense to separate. And they had a lot of robust discussion and ideas about that.
I think part of it was that when the money is restricted, just we went through a period where we had a large fund balance, but it didn't all, it can't all be spent. Because some of it is new market, some of it is leftover CTE money, or, whatever it is, that like, it doesn't all get spent. And so I think the board at the time recognized that and wanted to be clear that we don't want to count new market, because if we did have an emergency, we can't use new market money, from what I understand, or we probably shouldn't. We shouldn't depend on new market money to, pay to fix a roof or whatever it is. So I think we wanted to be clear that we are looking at the unassigned, that we are looking at the unassigned fund balance, or I won't say unassigned. We are looking at the fund balance beyond new market and whatever is dedicated to other things.
But in my 2 years, we've approved a budget that didn't comply with that.
Yeah.
Like, right. And again, I think with an idea that I'm like in year 2, I think I'm in a different place than was at the beginning of last year. There was sort of an understanding that we were in compliance when in fact we weren't, but there was sort of a general idea that we were. So there's been some confusion just even for me around what this meant, because we kind of presented a budget that was a $6 million, which I know is barely, it was 6.6 or 6.9, that was the budget that was developed a year ago, with the idea that was in compliance when in fact it wasn't. We ended up ending the year at like 11 million, which ultimately did put us in compliance, but we didn't budget that.
Right.
Like, so in many ways, like we didn't, I don't know, we need some work on this, I think, is to my point, to really get clarity about what we want. And then I'm kind of hearing of this is just even based on your, different comments here, that you want to see maybe a revision to this policy that meets your needs, as well as a longer kind of articulated plan to build back up to what you want. And that we would start to anticipate making some kind of educated guesses that will kind of alter over the course of the year, but that we'll have a plan that will get revised, that we'll keep bringing back to this body, showing our progress towards meeting a revised policy at some point. Is that kind of what you're saying? Is like, I want to see, what is your goal? When are we going to get to the policy that we agree on? And at least our best guess at our direction of where that's happening.
I'd be interested in the conversation. I don't, if we want to change, I don't know that I want to change the policy. So I'd be interested in if what language would be helpful in determining this. But yeah, the policy is actually on the budget. It's not even on the final, on the final number. But I am very interested in having a fund balance that does not count the new market money. I think that's fair.
And to be clear, I'm not asking for a change.
Yeah, right.
It's
yeah.
just, I've never, like, the way that it was operationally understood and the way that it actually reads was so different in the
Yes.
first few months here that
Right, yeah.
I was like, does everybody, so in your case, you understand and want
Yeah.
your current policy.
That was
Yes.
we thought we could attain it, but it became a goal, not a reality.
It's not a goal, it's a policy. And I think it's pretty clear. The intent is, yes, remove the skill center money. I don't think we didn't have anything earmarked that we thought that was the big number that was throwing it off, and it made sense to do it. The word outside sources makes it pretty clear. That tells me that's an outside source, New Market Skill Center. If we're talking about money that is restricted, but we're spending it, that's not outside, that's inside to me. And so if we need to make that sentence more clear, even if we wanted to say skill center, I believe, but I believe Lance came back with language around this. And I know we've had some turnover in the finance department, and so this was a question I had many times last year around it, but there were other higher priorities. And so if you need more clear language on it, I think we can give that, but I'm with Melissa in that this is what we intended. You take the skill center money out, and it's 6% of what's left, if that helps. Now we can say that a lot better and make it more clear, hopefully.
And I think that was the sentiment of the Budget Advisory Committee as well.
Oh, good.
They, expressed that. Just to give you an idea, so our restricted funds right now, and when we closed at the end of the year, it was about 3.5 million. Well, the Skills Center was at 1.7. So there was that, quite a gap. That increases the fund balance. And if we don't really explain that in the policy, then that leaves that question as to which general ledger totals we add to the fund balance.
So I think that's our target group right there, that
Yep.
remaining piece of whatever is not
Agreed.
skill center.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
Just to be clear, when you show us the monthly progress on that chart, is that with or without the restricted funds in it?
Yep, so the chart we've been using because of the cash situation, the chart that we're showing you now is cash. It is not fund balance, so there is a difference. And it doesn't exclude any cash, so it includes New Market Skill Center cash, it includes, where is that? There we go. So that is all cash reserves in our bank account, basically our county treasurer account at month end. Nothing excluded.
So I think once we get this settled, I'm not speaking for everybody here, but once we get this settled and get a little more clarity, then I would like to see the numbers without the skills center in there. It helps us make decisions for the district versus a conglomerate and a district.
Do you have what you need from us?
Do you have what you need from the board?
Yes, all right. Does anyone else have anything more to add to this budget guiding principles discussion? That was a great discussion about budget. I loved it. Let's see. I am a total nerd, yeah. With no further business coming before the board, the work session is adjourned at 7:04 p.m.